Yeah, hello everyone. Sorry for being a little late. Welcome to the Ohio Family Engagement Leadership Summit. We're glad that you could join us on this day of professional learning meant to take family, school, community partnership to the next level. My name is R.E.A.L, and I will be this session's moderator. This session is workshop 2. Get real with families about attendance and engagement. If you have any questions, concerns, or technical issues, please message me privately in the chat. And to ensure that all get the most out of day, we ask that all participants turn off their webcams and microphones. If you have questions for the presenter, please use the chat feature and I will pass them along at an appropriate time. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag OHSummit23 to share your thoughts. Okay, so I will pass the mic to our speakers, Katie and Susan, please.
Greetings, everyone. I am so pleased to be here with you. My name is Hetty Chang. I'm the founder, executive director of Attendance Works, and I'm accompanied by Susan Lieberman. Susan, you want to say hi? Just so you know, attendance. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say hi, everyone. We're so pleased to be here with you.
Attendance Works, if you all don't know us, we are a national organization, but we actually have deep work in Ohio, of which Susan is actually one of the co-coordinators of. We are located in different parts of the country, though. Susan's in Maine. I'm in San Francisco. I was actually born in Columbus, so I have this deep sense of connection to Ohio anyway. We are really pleased to be here. Let's go to the next slide, Joey. So we want to actually just take a moment to find out who's here with us. So if you might put in chat your name, your role, your school district or organization. And then here's a third thing that's a little different. Name, role, and who or what motivated you to show up to school every day when you were a kid. Hopefully, or if you had challenges and weren't able to always show up every day, who motivated you to show up on those days that you did manage to show up? So your name, your role, your district or organization, and what are those things that got you to show up to school, made it exciting, made it engaging? I remember for me that I had one incredible English teacher who just made learning literature incredibly fun. That was so critical in high school. And I'm seeing some folks, so thank you folks for starting to put this in. We're seeing teachers, friends, parents. Susan, you can also help me track this. And it's also exciting to see folks from all over Ohio showing up. By the way, moms being motivators, art classes, those things that really make you feel excited about school, because when you're there, you're doing something you love. The social occasion of schools, those are so really important. It looks like we've got folks from different places, even the school district of Philadelphia. So I'm not sure whether that's in Ohio or not, but North Canton, we're always welcome, glad other people can join. So Tiffin City, Barberton, Bellefontaine, Dayton, really exciting to see all the places that you all are coming from. Trotwood, and seeing so much about the different things that, again, moms, teachers, fun activities, friends being some of the key things that actually got you to show up to school. All right, let's go to the next slide. And even while I'm going to the next slide, feel free to continue to introduce yourself. And let me tell you a little bit about hopefully the treat you're in for in terms of at least engaging content that helps you do your work every day even better. We're going to start with an overview of chronic absence. This is a relatively new metric that's only been around for really since 2015-16, although we've been advocating for it a bit much longer. But we want to make sure we're all on the same page. And if some of that is you're actually quite familiar with, consider looking at this presentation as giving you tools so that when you have to explain it to the people around you who don't understand it, you're able to explain some of these concepts. We're going to talk about accessing data, and we're actually going to take you through looking at some of your data on the Ohio State Department of Education website, because we're not sure that everyone always knows how to do that. We're going to talk about a multi-tiered approach, which we see as absolutely essential to improving attendance, and how do we co-create solutions through caring conversations with our families, because family engagement is so essential and partnership is so essential with families in order to improve attendance. So thank you so much, folks, for showing up, and let's go to the next slide. So first of all, I just want to talk about the fact that when we think about chronic absenteeism and absenteeism, we see this, this is part of the why. Why do we do this work? As a leading indicator and a cause of educational inequity. And this country is founded on the notion that we create everyone having equal opportunities to learn. But when students are chronically absent, when they're missing a lot of school, it's an indicator of challenges that can both be in the community, like unstable housing, poor transportation, lack of access to health care, challenging health conditions. We've been through that a lot, mental health conditions in our community, as well as challenges in a school, bullying, the lack of engaging classrooms, insufficient supports to behavioral supports. So that what happens then is that those challenges, both external and internal, they actually are affecting kids, causing them to miss more school, but they're also causing them, when they are showing up to school, to struggle. If you're worried about bullying, if you don't have sufficient food, if you had an incredibly challenging lack of transportation to get to school, those things when you get to school are going to still affect you. And then they also cause you to miss more school, which then, because you are not having the same access to the opportunities for instruction, for engagement, for learning, you can fall farther behind. And if you go to the next slide, please, you can see that chronic absence starting in pre-K and K can actually predict for lots of kids a greater likelihood that you're not going to be able to read at grade level at the end of third grade, which we know in Ohio is really important. It's important everywhere, but you also have laws around that. It contributes to lower achievement and even greater likelihood of suspension in middle school. And it contributes to being more likely to drop out of high school. At the same time, well, when you show up to school more, you're more likely to read at third grade, more likely to do well in middle school, and you're more likely to graduate from high school. So this is showing that impact as kids miss more school and they suffer some of these challenges that make doing well in school even harder. Next slide. So what do I mean by chronic absence? When I say the term chronic absence, and again, this is a relatively new education metric, it's missing so much school for any reason that kids are at risk. And that's including excused absences, unexcused absences, and suspensions. And this is sort of a metric that shifts over time. So it's missing 10% or more school, which means 2 days in the first month, 4 days in the second month, 6 days in the third month. What we're trying to get folks to do is notice when kids are starting on track for chronic absence, so you can actually interrupt the pattern before they miss 10% of the entire school year. And while it's still easier to address the challenges, and this is different from truancy, which it really talks about unexcused absences or average daily attendance. And if we can go to the next slide. Let me just unpack this a little. So often we think 90% or 95%, that's an A. And you can actually have 95% average daily attendance. and have pretty high levels of chronic absence. So let's say, you have a school of 200 kids and 10 kids don't show up every single day. That's 95% attendance for those 200 out of that 200 kid school. Well, let's say it's a 180-day school year. And you have 1,800 absences there. Let's say you have 50 kids in that school, each of whom miss 20 days, which would make them chronically absent for the school year. That only uses 1,000 of that 1,800 absences. And you have a 25% chronic absence level. With chronic absence, you're really trying to identify who's missing so much school that they're academically at risk. And unless you add the data up from individual kids, you might not notice. And again, even at 95% or 90%, you can see really high levels. Even at 80%, you can see extraordinarily high levels. But because it doesn't sound so bad with average daily attendance, we may not notice the chronic absence challenge that we're facing. Next slide. And then when we think about truancy, which is unexcused absences, this is actually in my own school district when I first got them to crunch numbers. And I'd love for people for just a moment to write in chat, what do you see when you look at this graph? What do you notice? The red here are kids who are chronically absent at that point in the school year. And the black is the kids who had missed 10 days. So they would have really been noticed as truant. What are some of the things you see? One of the things I see is that kindergarten, you're masking half the kids who are chronically absent. And so if you just use unexcused absences, you wouldn't notice it. You also notice in this case that middle school data looks better, but I also will tell you this is one thing you look at data for, is that sometimes the challenge is that in California, we tended to count kids there for any period. So this actually showed that we were actually masking our levels of chronic absence because of how we were counting it. But the key thing is that truancy, which is unexcused absence, can really mask these high levels of chronic absence. Go to the next slide. So I'm just summarizing. When you think about average daily attendance, that's a school level metric. It helps you see things in the aggregate, like, oh my goodness, half-day parent-teacher conference days, kids don't show up. What does that mean? Or the day after Halloween, kids aren't showing up. Or, oh my God, kids and families are sort of creating their own vacations between Christmas and between Thanksgiving and the winter holidays, which then might suggest, or when bad weather strikes, even though schools open, kids aren't getting there. And it helps you to think about patterns that are affecting large numbers of schools that you could find either through incentives or like with winter holiday, better messaging about what's happening on the holidays, or let's say with poor weather, making sure kids get warm clothes so they can get to school even when there is difficult weather. And if you could please mute, thank you. That'd be great. But it masks individual issues. Truancy only looks at unexcused absences, tends to emphasize compliance with school rules, tends to emphasize legal, more blaming solutions, because if you don't show up, then we might take you to court, we might have these fines. And chronic absence is looking at all absences, emphasizing when you miss school, you missed out on the instruction, you missed out on opportunities for engaging and connecting with your peers, you missed out on opportunities to be in fun activities, like the ones that engaged all of you and showing up to school. Chronic absence really emphasizes taking a preventive problem-solving approach, where you recognize that when kids and families have faced trauma, they're more likely to be chronically absent. There's research that shows that's true. When kids and families have experienced trauma, the key is to say, what happened? Not what's wrong with you. What happened? How can I help you? How can I partner with you? And it's when you forge that strong partnership with families that then you can find out what are the challenges and issues that cause them to miss school in the first place, and then come up with meaningful solutions. But if we sort of blame them and accuse them in our first interaction with them, we're going to actually do the absolute opposite of what we need to do, which is create a respectful partnering relationship where we all know we care about a kid and their future. Next slide. So our country is facing an attendance crisis like we've never, ever seen before. Pre-pandemic, it was already a big issue. It was 8 million kids. Now it's nearly doubled. It affects more than 1 out of 4 students nationwide, actually close to 30%, almost 30%. And the early data that we're seeing from this just immediate past school year suggests that it remained high. Maybe a little better, not much. And I will just say, this cannot be our new normal. If equal opportunity to education is critical to our country's future and the welfare of our kids, this is not acceptable. And we know that certain kids are disproportionately affected. And we know that there's some really high levels, there are some grade level patterns. And I want to go to the next slide for a second, that shows you a little bit of what's happening in Ohio. So in Ohio, you can see you've had an extraordinary increase in chronic absence yourselves. I wouldn't trust the 2019-20 day too much, because schools closed down, and in a lot of places, not just Ohio, we just didn't even know what to do and how to whether we should keep collecting attendance. So you see these decreases that aren't real. But if you look at 16, so almost 17% before the pandemic, and now you're at 30%, that's a huge increase. Next slide. And these are your grade level patterns. So you see really high levels. And the pandemic, I think, affected some kids even more, particularly kids in transition experiences. So kids coming into kindergarten, and then kids 9th grade, 10th grade. And we just see enormous increases at the high school levels as well. Next slide. And then again, these patterns of disproportionate impact, and economics are a huge factor, whatever group you're talking about, in terms of how they're experiencing chronic absence. So this is really important. I am just trying to make sure that there is some questions in the chat, Susan, I think, about what counts. Is that what's happening here?
Yes, and I think I mentioned that it depends on what percentage of the school day that people leave, and it's per day. It's not.
Well, so I think this is where Ohio and national work is a little tricky.
I'm exactly how that's counted.
So, Susan, can you hear me? I'm a little worried about my internet connection. But in Ohio, you all calculate attendance for the state on an hourly basis. And when the federal recommended definition of attendance is usually saying kids have to show up at least half a school day, I think there's actually some discretion going on, and you might have to ask your school district about how they're noticing when kids are chronically absent. Some places actually will do 10% of periods. You can do 10% of hours. That's another way to do it. But I think, Susan, if I'm correct, in Ohio, there's a little bit of flexibility in how that's getting interpreted as people are doing their actual chronic absence data calculations. So this may be an important question to ask of your school district as you're looking at data. What makes a kid considered chronically absent? And how are they defining it? By days, or by, and if it's days, how many periods they have to show up? Or are they actually calculating it based on 10% of periods, which is another alternative approach to doing it. Okay, next slide. So you all have been submitting data to the state, and you can actually take a look at that data. And we want to give a chance for you guys to see that. So we're going to have Susan take over the screen. So thank you, R.E.A.L. And Susan is we're going to walk you through, and then we're going to actually ask you to do this for your district of choice. So this is the Ohio State Department of Education website. And as Susan already put a link there, When you go on that website, if you click on login, this is what we've heard is the key little trick here. It will then show up public data. Then click on public data. And then if you scroll down, you will see attendance data. So student attendance data. And then you click on school attendance data. And you can have choices. Do you want to look at the state? Do you want to look at a school? Do you want to look at the district? We're going to take a district. So, Susan, and let's take a look at Akron since it's an A. And one thing, so now you'll see it just taking a moment to populate, and it gives you this great information that you can know to look at what's happening in your district. And this is actually for the 22-23 school year already, I think. Wow. I think
Yes, it looks like the 22. I'm impressed with Ohio. They have
it already out for 22-23. So
data available.
Absolutely. And so when you know, in that part where it says choose a district, Susan chose Akron. Just as a little hint, when you look at that list, there's charters are considered districts. So you have lots of names, both charters and districts. But then if you look here, you can see Akron. And again, now this is last year's data, which is pretty, you know, key and early. So now you can look and you can see 45%. There's 38% in first grade, 45% was their kindergartners. You can see grade level. You can see it by ethnicity. Susan, do me a favor, because you might even be able to do this. Go to, see if you can choose a different school year. So like we could compare 2022-23 with the prior school year.
My computer's working slowly, but it will get there. There it is.
And thank you, Barb, for saying there's another way to do this. But so you can actually look at what's happening. So you can see, I actually think there were some slight improvements in Akron, if I'm remembering the previous slide before. But you can take a look at that. So we actually want to give you a moment. Pick your favorite place. You can actually do schools, you can use districts, pick some place that you care about and you're working in, and take a look at the chronic absence data and see what you see. Look at the ethnicities, look at the grade levels, you know, what do you notice about that information? And then we're going to actually put you into small groups in a moment. But let me just we're going to take 4 minutes here. Go on to your own screens. And maybe Susan, maybe Jahwe, please show slide 15 for a second so people can remember what they're supposed to look at. And then Susan, can you re-put into the chat one, not yet this one, yet this one. Susan, put back into your chat the link, and you all can now go take a look. And we're just going to take a couple minutes here. I would sing for you, but that would distract you and be problematic. But we'll just go for a couple minutes of silence.
And Barbara's right. There is a local report card as part of the gap closing that you can look at. This is just one of a number of different tools that you can access. So thank you, Barb, for mentioning that.
You know, and if you look and then you want to look at another year, you could actually start to see patterns to see whether it got better or worse. You know, I think those are a couple things that you might try.
And Nancy, I saw your question and I'm trying to look it up and get that information to you.
I am also going to put into the chat, if you're not from, we have a report that we did called Monitoring Attendance Data Matters More Than Ever. And in it, we have it on our website. We actually have a table that has information, a link to every state's chronic absence data. And so I'm going to put the link to that table in the chat. And therefore, if you're not in Ohio, you can go take a look at your state's data. There are a handful of states for whom, so not every state has last year's data, but the vast majority do. And then there are a couple states, I think New Hampshire is one of them. I can't remember. There are two states that don't have it, but everyone else has some form of chronic absence data on it. So I just put the state table, and then you can, if you're from another state, you can look at that table, find your state, and then figure out, then click on the link. And I'm seeing people going on to that link. So I think we've probably got 4 or 5 people from other states. The other possibility is, even though you're not from Ohio, I think Ohio actually provides some really useful data. Like grade level data is only available in 18 states. So Ohio's ahead of the game for actually offering grade level data that you can see. You could always pick a random district, some name, Columbus, we've all heard of that, and just take a look at the data, and just use the Ohio link too. That's another option if you're not from Ohio, because I think it gives you an example of the power of being able to see data. And if you want to, you can use that to articulate back to your own state. Hey, if we don't do this, we ought to be providing these kinds of reports. And as Susan said, kudos to Ohio for getting their data out early. All right, let's put the small group directions up. And hopefully you all had a chance to do this, even with Susan and I chatting in the background. So let's go to the next slide, please. So we are going to send you into small groups of 5. And in your small groups, we want you to talk about 2 questions. What are you noticing about which students, grades, particular groups that are struggling with attendance? And who should see and be aware of this data? So with that, I'm going to ask Jarway to please.
I actually created the rooms, and we will break you out. It is for 10 minutes. You'll notice that you'll have 9 minutes, and then you have 60 seconds to close up. So it's a full 10 minutes.
And a couple comments about the 10 minutes and not 9 minutes. Please turn on your video camera. Please introduce yourself. Just take a second, go around and say who you are. You can raise your hand to speak, ask clarifying questions if you guys have different wonderings about things. Whoever has the first name closest to the letter A, and actually we're going to ask you to do go to one school or one district. So we want you to have the shared experience of looking at data together, if that makes sense. So you've now had a chance to look at it on your own. We want you to go with a group, got 5 people. We're going to do it on Ohio data. The person who's A is the facilitator. And the person whose first name is closest to Z gets to choose a place in Ohio that you're going to go look for. So, maybe whoever is A, if you don't mind sharing the screen and just walking through so you all are looking at the same information at the same time. We just want to have you have a shared experience of looking at data and seeing what you notice. And then when you see the data, what are you seeing about which students and who are the kinds of folks who should know about this?
All right. I will open up the rooms.
And if you have any questions or problems, just come back to this main room and we can help you. Susan and I can wander to your rooms and be a support. Sometimes the challenge can be that families value education, but they don't recognize how important the kindergarten experience is to actually contributing to that. Tammy, you raise your hand. I'm going to let you speak, and then we're going to speak to a couple of the things in chat, and then we're going to move on. But Tammy, would you like to say something?
Sure. One of the members of our group pointed out, we looked at Washington local schools, which is it's not an urban, but it's a pseudo-urban in Region 1 up by Toledo. And the homeless population, the chronic absenteeism rate was huge. It was large for all across the district, in the 20 approaching 30%, but homeless population was in 60 some percent. So that is an important question to take back to the district of, okay, what are we doing specifically to help these students who have this extra challenge of not having a place to live every day get
Absolutely. To school. And it may speak to a different kind of set of network of supports if you know something about the challenge, homeless or special ed, that allows for us to think about what those resources, or even kindergarten. This is also about tailoring, because how you talk with families of kindergartners. We did a focus group with families in kindergarten in California, and one of the things they said was they had no idea when to keep their kids home, sick or not, and because they thought kindergarten, and especially this was true with families of first-time kindergartners, they didn't realize the benefits of it. They're like, well, if in doubt, I'll just keep them home because I'm worried about my baby and I don't want them to get sick. So, how do you engage families? And so Sabine put in crucial to share with families the data and provide information about, what represents. So engaging families in these conversations certainly are key. Folks also talked about that the data doesn't always reflect cultural reasons, hunting, fishing, different kinds of things. And so understanding from families what's going on and what are they balancing, talking about it as a community is really critical. And it is, and we'll go into this as Susan talks about it, we'll start talking about the importance of going into root causes. And boy, Anika, 95% for kindergarten, I think that's what that was referring to. That is pointing out that there might need to be even cross-community approaches to really talking about the importance of getting kids back into that routine of school starting early. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to you, Susan, to talk about a multi-tiered approach. And Candace, maybe you can put your comment into the chat. We really appreciate that, but we want to make sure we can get through the wealth of material that we have today.
Well, thank you. Next slide. And there's so many great conversations going on in the small groups, the chat. And in this section, we're going to continue this conversation and talk about the Attendance Works tiered system of supports. And really, it's a lot of what you've been touching upon, which is how relationships are essential at every level. Next slide. So we really need to understand these continued high levels of chronic absence. As you can see from the data, we're seeing this increase in that chronic absence. And we know that also reflects that positive conditions for learning are missing for too many students. So this is the foundation of our work, these conditions, these pillars of conditions for learning. We know that students are more likely to attend regularly when school is physically and emotionally healthy and safe, when school creates a sense of belonging, connection, and support, when we are able to offer academic and address academic challenges and engagement, and it's made up of staff and students who have the well-being and the emotional competence to build these relationships that are core of these positive conditions for learning. And you see at the center of this is the relationship. That's the heart of this all. And chronic absence occurs when challenges in the community or in the school erode any one of these positive conditions for learning. Next slide. So this tiered system of support is probably going to be very familiar to many of you. And in order to provide this equitable access to education, schools and districts really need to put in place a tiered system of support for students and families. And many of you work with that multi-tiered system. So we're going to use attendance data to inform that multi-tiered system of support. So we can look at tier 1, which is really universal strategies to encourage good attendance for all students. Now, the tier 2, the early intervention, that's students missing 10 to 19%, and that provides that early intervention for students who need more support to avoid chronic absence. And then tier 3 is really that intensive interventions for those students missing 20% or more. And those are the students who are facing the greatest challenges to get into school. So what's unique about this multi-tiered pyramid is that these 3 tiers sit on a foundation of supports, and those foundational supports provide those positive conditions for learning. So keep in mind that these are additive. It's kind of like an elevator. You know, a student needing tier 3 supports, you really still needs those tier 1 and 2 and those foundational supports. And we need to see, are those in place as we're looking at those intensive interventions? Next slide, please. So let's go more into detail with the positive conditions for learning. And it's about the school climate and culture. It's a way in which staff, students, families, and the community actually work together. So this is really what we've seen and what really draws students into school. So as I said, we know students are more likely to attend regularly when schools provide that physical and emotional health and safety. So that's about welcoming students to school. What happens when you walk through that door? How are students, how are families greeted? Do we have access to food and other basic needs? Is there a place for students to go or for teachers or staff to be able to offer food and basic needs? Is there a sense of that belonging, connection, and support? This is really about how are we actively engaging all students, not just some students, but all students and families. How are we using those advisories to meet with students? And then what about the academic challenge and engagement? And this is for whether, for all students, whether they're gifted or they're struggling, what is that access to those learning supports that they need? Whether it's project-based, whether it's technology that they need because it's expected of them for their homework. What is it that we need to support those students? And then the adult and student well-being. This is about restorative check-ins. This is about not only staff to student relationships, this is about staff to staff relationships, this is about student to student relationship, and this is about staff to administration relationship. This is about how we're all working together. And it's really about that trauma-informed practice and staff self-care. Next slide. So when you're thinking about it, in your experience, what helps students and families feel a sense of belonging, connection, and support? Please add to the chat. What do you think? What helps students and families feel that sense of belonging, connection, and support? That's such an important, remember, that's the heart of those conditions for learning, those relationships. The communication, their voice matters. Oh my goodness, we often forget student voice matters. Feeling understood and not alone. Validation. Oh, you've captured it. Co-creation. It's that partnership. Input to policy. Thank you for mentioning that. And when family feels like their needs are being considered, when they're being a partner, people can tell when it's a one-way versus a two-way conversation, and that open communication that happens both within the school community as well as others. Just remembering names, the greeting that we give everybody when they come in, and we notice that individual students, what a difference that can make, and making everybody and the parent feel connected. Does it say, welcome to my school? Or does it say, please report to the principal's office immediately, all visitors? We want that welcome. So thank you. And helping families understand they're not alone. I love these comments. You're adding so much to this conversation. So thank you. Next slide, please. Part of this is the relationship mapping. We use this relationship mapping guide to see which students are well supported and which ones lack the adult connections. And so the goal is for every student to be connected to a caring adult in the school building. Everyone should feel those connections that you've all talked about. Now, you can use this electronic method, but some of you may remember or have used the old-fashioned method, which is putting the name of every student on a note card. And then you put all those note cards up on the wall and you ask the staff to mark who has a connection to the students, to each student, so you can visually see which students have a lot of connections and which ones either have none, or you might notice that the connections are only with the principal or the dean because they have a lot of disciplinary connections. So what we want to see is which ones have the positive connection. And one school that I know, they noticed that the same kids had connections with multiple staff and far too many kids. There were too many staff that didn't know the kids. And that's what you want to notice here. It's a really powerful tool. Thank you, Barb, for mentioning that. And whatever method you use, the goal is to figure out how do you reach out to those students who don't have a positive connection with staff. And you don't have to make it overwhelming. You can break it down so that, and use your ed tech staff. They're in the classroom. They are also in the lunchroom and have interactions with students every day. It's such a, use everybody. It's not just teaching staff. Next slide. And that's a great idea, Tammy. I love that. Which students would you say that have a positive connection with staff? That's a great way to turn the same question around. So thank you for adding that. So, tier 1 is those students. Remember, this is universal for everyone. And these are strategies and action steps that we can use for all students. So there are things like the communicating schedules, just making that there's clear and consistent communication. It comes out in multiple languages so that all families can access the information. It's about those routines, rituals, and celebrations. But this third point that's on here, I really want to emphasize here. It's not just about personalized communication. It's about personalized positive communication. We're so accustomed to telling parents, your child was absent for 4 days. That's, we're going to tell you what's wrong and what needs to be solved. How about saying, your child, missed school, we missed your child. Your child plays a really important role in our classroom and we miss your child. And that's the role that we want to talk about. So we also want to understand the impact of the attendance on the whole child is widely understood. And so I'm trying to keep up also with the chats here because there's so many great answers. In your experience, which tier 1 attendance supports have been most essential at your school or your district or your community? Which ones do you find that really helpful? Greeting kiddos at the door and knowing their names. Absolutely. I can tell you the story of my 2 kids, it's, there's too many kids that will say a lot of times somebody greets everybody at the door, but it's those people that notice them that can say, I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you. Recognition of that good improved. Thank you. And we're not saying perfect. We're saying good improved. Next slide. This next one is about really a tool about messaging. And I think it's really important that we share about this messaging. And it's really based on this positive message and not just saying you've missed 2 days, but saying the reason why we need to have you here and showing up. It's an opportunity to build routines, increase engagement, provide access to resources, and support learning. And that's what we're trying to do here. And I think it's really our goal is to let families know why it's important for you to be part of this. Next slide. And forging partnerships with families. And here's some tips. And the one thing I really want to point out here is that two-way supportive conversations. Sometimes we come in and we focus on the message that we want to share rather than listening. And sometimes when we focus on the message we want to share, the message becomes one way. And we really need to take a step back and really think about, how are we listening? What are we hearing? And provide that tailored, personalized, caring message. And sometimes what we need to do is talk about not attendance, but just what's special and what's that connection with the family. Next slide. Here's a handout that's really helpful. And I find, and it's in multiple languages, and so it's really a great resource for you. And please sign up for the attendance awareness campaign. It's emails that you come periodically and you will can read at your leisure. And it's a great opportunity for you to hear about some great resources. Next slide. This is also a great resource, the Student Attendance Success Plans. They're designed to help students and families make a plan to get to school. And what I really like about it is that the Families Help Bank is really about, how do you take the family's community, their natural resources, their natural network, and how can we absolutely use them to help support the family. The other thing that I really like is the calendar. I've certainly sat down and said to families and students, have you noticed something about this? I was looking at this calendar, noticing how many absences you've had. It's just a visual, because some people respond to visual prompts rather than just a verbal prompt. And it's a really helpful resource. Next slide, please. So during the pandemic, this is also a really helpful new resource. So this is hot off the press that you're getting here. So during the pandemic, we had a lot of good reasons to become very cautious about keeping kids home during the illness. And so even though COVID is still with us, we've made a lot of progress in reducing the impact. But families are still confused and also concerned about when they should send their child to school and when not to send their child to school. So they wanted guidance. So we worked with Kaiser Permanente and the National Association of School Nurses, and did a whole bunch of focus groups, and to really create this guidance to help families make good decisions about when their child shows signs of illness. So only keeping them home when it's truly, truly necessary. So if you're interested, share this with your local health department and school district to make sure it's keeping with what they advise. And if so, please share it with everyone, share broadly. If not, look at it, think how you can use it, and update your local guidance and create your own document with this. But this is a great resource. Next slide. Now let's talk about Tier 2. Tier 2 and identifying students for Tier 2. Remember, those are the students missing school between 10 to 19%. So this is an early intervention layer of support to address those specific barriers. So it's the beginning of school. It's the first month of school. So we're looking at students who've missed just 2 to 3 absences. And after the first 2 months of school, we're looking at students who've missed 4 to 7. Remember, it's percentage of hours and days enrolled, because I know in Ohio, you're looking at those hours. And think about who can initiate these kind of supports. And when we're talking about different supports, next slide, here are some evidence-based strategies that you can use. And they range from check-in and check-out or mentoring type programs, and you can do it and I really like these programs because it's saying, and it's connecting a student with somebody who might notice when they're gone, or more importantly, when they're in school. And it can be formally, you can use the Success Mentor Program, or informally, you can just set up sort of a small morning job for a student to do with a staff member, and sort of build that connection with that student. You can use the attendance success plan. You can engage in after-school programming and home visits. Again, home visits can be positive. Let's check in the beginning of school. How's the student doing? What's working well? What are the challenges? Understand the root causes. And of course, the other thing is use your school nurses. School nurses are a great resource, and they can help understand some of the things that are going on, particularly when you're talking about a child with medical concerns. Next slide. So for the next school discussion, Hetty's going to describe it, and I'm going to set this up for everybody for the small groups.
So we'd just love for you to really talk about what are some of the tier 2 interventions that can be piloted or implemented, or maybe you've done something and it's been a success and you want to share it with other folks. And then, but for the ones that you're considering and that you haven't tried, thinking about how might you support those tier 2 interventions. So it's really that conversation. You can use the list that Susan just said, talking about check in, check out, mentoring, student attendance success plans, after school, home visits, integration to IEPs, connection to school nurse words, something else. So again, the rules are similar. Turn on your video camera, introduce yourself, raise your hand, encourage everyone to speak. If you are having difficulties with audio, just use the chat and talk that way, but just let people know that's what's happening. And then person who is closest, their first name is closest to the letter M, you get to facilitate. We're equal opportunity with the alphabet here. So we're going to send you into small groups. You'll have about 10 minutes. If you have any challenges, come back and let us know.
I think you can pause the recording.
But I will say that, so welcome back, Anissa, who's does many things, roles, and family engagement. We're just talking about how so challenging it is because some of our families are facing lots of, challenges with basic needs, and we may not know that. So being able to support this in this positive way where we're caring and engaging is so critical to helping families feel hope and connection and feel engaged. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Susan to facilitate a little large group conversation.
And every little thing, Lisa, you were just talking about just the small things you can do. And I just think every connection, everything you do does make a difference. Some days it may not feel like anything's working, but sometimes, because as educators, social service, wherever you are, sometimes it feels like our to-do list is so large, but we just need to take time and remember all those little things do matter, and you need to reflect on all the things that you have done. So thank you for being part of this discussion and all that you do. So as we've got people coming back, I just wanted to, and I want to recognize and honor what you're all doing. What is a tier 2 intervention that you might adopt or expand in your school community?
And folks can either offer that in the chat, or if you want to put a raised hand, we can let someone speak up a little bit. Either way. Or if you want to, or if you want to brag about something you're doing that's really working, that can be here too.
So what's a tier 2? Oh, the attendance contracts. And I really appreciate that, attendance contracts, and thinking them as a success plan, so that it's not just about attendance, but it's how can we work together and support each other in being successful. So thanks, Bruce, for mentioning that. And the attendance intervention team working together. It's really a team effort. It is not one person's responsibility. It's nicer. It's sometimes easy to just say, oh, Hetty will take care of it. Hetty knows it. Hetty knows all the kids. She can do it all. But it really takes a village, and it requires everyone being involved. The attendance team making home visits. Karen, thanks. And those positive home visits. It's not just I caught you home visit. It's how can we work together let me tell you about something that I really like about your child, and improved absenteeism by 50%. Just saying you noticed and building connections. That's great. NBA never has absence incentives. Thanks. That's funny. Any other workshop for parents and engaging parents? Food, having the students present something and then engaging families in that is always a nice way. Lots of creative ideas.
Susan, this is kind of a tier 1, tier 2, but there was a high school in, I didn't think of it as a high school strategy, but it was in Rhode Island, where the parents became trained attendance workers, and the parents would actually greet kids as they were coming into school. And then they would also notice the kids, because they were all from the neighborhoods, that didn't show up to school. And then they would call the parents of the other kids and the kids to check in and see if they were okay. And evidently that was a really effective strategy, because high school kids, I think it was both. They felt cared about, but they didn't really want parents calling their parents and talking to them. But it was both supportive and showing a community, and it worked really well.
That's great. That's great. It's all about being noticed and wanting to show what you've done, just being noticed. Thanks. And I love providing resources that families might not have.
This is Jane. This is Jane Groff from Kansas. Sorry for the frog in my throat. One of the things we do is a workshop really built on attendance works, support and information. And we do it, we put together a PowerPoint for schools and districts to use with their families. Very basic, from definitions of excused and unexcused absences. Of course, what is chronic absenteeism? Just some real basic, and then 2 fun activities that Attendance Works has in a booklet that they had. And this morning I was sharing about that in another session, and I said I think the onus is a lot on schools, because families don't understand chronic absenteeism, don't know what difference it makes if their kids are at school or not. So we have found in our work that when families hear the information and know, they are really motivated then to get their kids to school. And this morning I shared that, and there was a mom in the breakout session with us. And as soon as I finished sharing about that, the mom said, "Oh my goodness, that would be so wonderful. That is so true. We just don't know." So that was fun this morning to hear it from a parent just say, yes, we just don't know some of this stuff.
It's so true, Jane. And thanks for bringing that up, because it's a lot of times we're all so busy as parents. You're running in lots of different directions that you may not realize, especially if it's just 1 or 2 days a month or 2 to 3 days a month. You think, oh, well, they went for the last week. And Ella, if you wouldn't mind putting your ideas in chat, I would really appreciate it, because we want to get on to, there's so much we want to cover today and make sure that everybody also has a chance to speak. But we don't want to lose what you have to offer. Tier 3 is, I want to also mention tier 3, because these are the more intensive and require more supports. And we often look to partners for those supports. And so that means bringing in your housing folks, bringing in the medical community, looking at interagency case management. And at the last resort, you can look at legal intervention, but it's really a last resort. There's so many aspects of the community, whether you're in a rural area or in a large urban area, there are those supports that are available. Next slide. And I'm going to pass this on to Hetty.
Great. And I put in the chat our Bringing Attendance Home Toolkit, which is what I believe Jane from Kansas was drawing upon. And Jane, if you want to add in a link to the information that you shared, please, folks might have to tailor it a little bit to Ohio, but I'm sure folks would love to see it. So let's go to the next slide. This is really about how do we think about co-creating solutions. And I just want to kind of remind folks about why that matters. And that's because we know that when kids go to school, when families go to school, it's because they feel hope. They feel hope for a better future. They feel faith that the school in which their kid is at is getting them, going to get them to that better future. And they also have a voice in those decision making. This actually reflects some of the things that you said earlier in the chat about what makes kids and families feel connected, that sense of belonging and engagement. And you have access to those needed supports and services. So hope, faith, voice, and access, that can be a way of thinking about how we do that. But having voice, being a partner in this, is key to all of these different pieces. So next slide. So some of this is actually thinking about how we shift the power dynamics. So we're really changing them, and we're shifting to a partnership approach. Oh, it's because you don't care. That's why we're gonna why you're not showing up to school. I'm seeing a little unstable internet, so Susan warned me if you can't hear me. And then you're going to shift that to, I'm contacting a family, not to blame, not to scold, but to build a relationship that will be based on their assets. Shifting from just using letters and robocalls to communicate with families to really listening with families, finding out their hopes and dreams, school experiences, assets, needs. And that's not done by a one-way communication. That's through a two-way personalized contact. Focusing on what the student and families don't focus just on what they don't do, but highlight what are their strengths and how they can move forward. This has been really tough time. When we focus on deficits, we tend to make families feel more hopeless. When you feel hopeless and helpless, you can change things and make a difference. And that's why we got to shift these dynamics. And shifting from saying, I'm going to give you expert advice, this is what I know and this is what you ought to do, to collaborating with families so that we can encourage them to have the confidence to move forward. Okay, next slide. So we also want to just point out that when you want to reduce chronic absence, you really are needing to understand, this is both at a group but at an individual level, what are those challenges? What barriers? Is it aversion? Is it disengagement? Is it these misconceptions? And as you're talking with families, hear and find out what that is, and then what's going to motivate a shift in this. Next slide. So we also think you can think about this work and tailor it based on levels of absenteeism. So if kids are showing up basically most of the time, 95% of the time, missing less than 5%, that's satisfactory attendance. And we don't have to worry about it, but it is good to make sure we can take stock of what are they doing well and encouraging them to continue that. When kids are at risk, talking about, noticing that they're starting to, their attendance is starting to be a little challenging, but mostly you're just using that to check in with them. How are things going and what would get you to show up even more frequently? And then if a kid's missing 10 to 20%, you're starting to find out what motivates them, connect them to resources. But then if they're missing 20% or more, that's when you might want to realize that I got to have a longer conversation. I might need to involve other supports in this, because the level of absenteeism often reflects the level of challenge they're facing in their lives. Next slide. So the thing, though, is how do we have these caring conversations? So we're going to pretend for a moment that I'm Alyssa's teacher and Susan is Alyssa's mom. And I'm going to just read a little bit so you know what Alyssa's situation is, and their teacher's situation. So I've noticed that Alyssa seems a little more reserved, a little less attentive than normal in class. She's missed 8 days of school in the 2.5 months of school and is frequently tardy. She sometimes says she doesn't feel well, but I'm not so sure she's seriously ill. And I have just not been able to contact Susan, Alyssa's mom, at all. So Susan, what's your situation?
So my child, Alyssa, has asthma. I'm really scared about it. All this talk about COVID, the long COVID, it's getting me nervous because she keeps wheezing. And so it's also hard to get her to school on time because she's up at nights. So, and I'm also concerned about the other kids and what diseases they might have. And so I keep her at home sometimes, because she feels lost in class. She doesn't want to look dumb in front of the other kids, because she's not been there. And I haven't found that Alyssa's school knows what it's like for you to manage all of these issues with asthma and what I should be doing.
Imagine if I came in and I said to Susan, oh, are you Alyssa's mom?
Yeah. What do you want to know? Why are you asking?
You know, I am really concerned. Susan, I've been trying to reach you all year long. You know, it's 2 months of school. I finally found you. You are so hard to reach. And you know what? Your daughter has already missed 8 days of school. What is going on?
You know, I'm working 2 jobs. I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
Susan's actually being nice by not cussing me out, right? So when we're really busy, we try to jump to the chase and we don't build relationships. What if I did it this way instead? Are you Alyssa's mom?
Yes.
I am. Oh God, you know, I'm so delighted to meet you, Susan. I can't believe it's already been 2 months, and I know it's just been a crazy year. And I am just so excited to meet you because I'm really so happy to have your daughter Alyssa in my class. You know, Alyssa is one of those kids who I notice she is really, really so sensitive to the needs of other kids. She is really attentive, and noticing when another child needs help. You did something really wonderful in raising such an empathetic child.
Oh, thank you for noticing her. Yeah, she's always reached out, always been the kid in the neighborhood who helps the other kids.
Well, that's such a wonderful quality. That said, Susan, I've noticed, so this is Alyssa's attendance for the first 2.5 months. And I want to first check with you, does this seem right? It seems like she's missed 8 days already. Is that your understanding too?
I don't know. It's been so hard. Alyssa's been wheezing a lot. She's been staying up at night. It's been really concerning.
So Alyssa when you say she's staying up, like, what's going on?
She has asthma and it keeps getting worse. And I'm so worried that being around other kids is going to make it worse for her.
All right. So you guys get is basically the gist here. How you come in. Someone wrote in the chat before that first impressions, are really important. How you reach out to a family, how you make that point. And I want to go to the next slide. So we think that most people believe that relationships matter. It's just often when we're in a rush, we forget, right? So the thing is, we want you to think about how do you have a caring conversation? And that starts with learning about the student and the family. And I could have also asked things like, you know, how's the school year going? Making sure as you are coming in, you find everyone has something positive about them. You find something positive, because when we can notice an asset, when we can notice a strength, notice and talk to families about something their kid does well, that will always change the dynamic, and appreciate parents for all the work that they do. And then saying, okay, let's talk about attendance, but not like we know it all, but can we check and see if it's accurate? And by the way, sometimes attendance records are inaccurate. And then before we go off on something, we better make sure it makes sense to both of us. And then discussing, and then arriving at a plan. Okay, so now we're going to just go through a couple more details on these things. So next slide. So, you know, learn about the student's family. What are their hopes and dreams? Offer those positive observations. Next slide. And then when you're informing them, literally, and this is why Susan talked about before, she loves that a calendar. And by the way, the versions on our website are multilingual and now updated to the current, every year, somewhere in the summer, we go and update all the calendars so that they fit the current school year. But you can actually mark, there's not something that's so visual about marking things, looking at patterns. One school, I know they had a success mentor who checked in with the kids. And one of the things that she used to have lunches with the kid, and one kid who had kept missing every Friday. When they realized the kid was missing every Friday, they realized that what happened was that was the day that the only day that dad had the day off. And dad was spending time with the kid. So then what the school realized was they had to create incentives for the dad to come to school with the kid. And then they would do things like, okay, you can have a movie ticket or something. But had they not understood the pattern, then understood the reason why, because kid does need time with dad, they couldn't have come with a real solution. But by noticing the days and noticing the pattern, it allowed them to kind of understand what some of the issues were. And then sometimes with families, you're saying, like, let's say it's not a whole day, but they're missing certain mornings. And you're like, that's reading period. This is when, and this is what's happening. Families aren't always aware of what's happening in schools to understand what they're missing. Absolutely, Susan, that volunteering can be, but you come up with creative solutions. So the next slide, after you inform and you understand what's going on, then you discuss what would motivate them to come, what are the reasons for absenteeism, what would help reduce absenteeism, and also maybe there are other ways you have to look at for finding out how to make up those lost opportunities to learn the classroom. Maybe they do need intensive tutoring. Maybe they need to be in an expanded or a summer learning class, because kids have missed out on a lot. And some of the opportunity is by helping them connect to other resources that can help them feel successful in class. Because if kids don't feel successful in class, sometimes they do not want to show up. And using that help bank to identify support systems. And helping families remember they have support systems. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they don't think as creatively as they could be about what are their support systems. Next slide.
In addition to that, it also bullying is part of that aspect too. When kids are being bullied in school, cyberbullying, that causes them to also.
Absolutely, Carmen. So if we go back for just a second, if you discuss and you find out that one thing is the kid's worried about bullying, then you better address it. And if you do this with a number of families and you find 3 or 4 kids are worried about bullying, now we got another issue at hand, right? It's not just, and maybe a different type of professional development and support. So I will say these are really important for both understanding individual kids, but to the extent that you can aggregate data, it's really important, because sometimes the solution is not a single kid solution. There's actually needed to be a programmatic or school-wide approach to it. Next slide. And then with the family, you're arriving at a plan and you're figuring out how to, and you might even write this up, have a way then, and figure out, when do you check in? Is it going? Are these strategies working? And making sure the family has a copy of it as well as you all have that. Next slide. So we're actually going to go to this slide and just open up, because I think you guys are, no, next slide, that was correct. So what do you can talk about your reactions to these, this approach to caring conversations, but you can also talk about when and how you might equip families or school staff to engage in these caring conversations. One school, I'll just give an example as you're thinking about this, and you can also share. We actually took teachers in a school and trained them to do this as part of their parent-teacher conferences. And we actually had teachers we went through that approach that I just shared with you, this process of caring conversations. Then we actually had teachers take a kid who was severely chronically absent in their class and partner with another teacher, and one played kind of an irate parent and one played, difficult, and they role played. How would they talk with those families? And then we had the schools look at their list, and they actually noticed, for example, that some kids, this was an elementary school, there were 3 kids in the same family, but they were with 3 different teachers. So then the 3 different teachers said, oh, we better collaborate together to talk about how do we approach. And some of the families were actually really struggling with homelessness. They were in a particular area, a hotel that, that they get housed in. So they actually had to have a different kind of strategy about working with that family. So curious, this isn't a report out. We're not doing small groups, but what do you all think? Can you use this caring conversation approach? And who are folks in your schools that you might equip with them? And if you've tried something like that, please share. And feel free to either share in the chat or actually share so it's Karen, your question, if the fault is that the parent has 3 different kids, it wasn't so much guilting the parent, but checking in with the parent about what's going on in their life, what are some of the challenges they're facing, and seeing if you can connect them to community resources. So I think that's finding it's that what happened and how can we help, as opposed to what's wrong with you and how do you change. I am, do you mind, I realize I cannot read quickly enough. Barb, would you mind coming off mute and saying a little bit about what's in your very wonderful chat thing?
Okay, so I am super excited because one of my former students reached out to me and is on this call. So Lily, feel free to jump in anytime. But one thing I did is before school started, I would send home to each family and their student a pink index card and a green index card. And I put it in an envelope, mail it home, my money, didn't matter. It was about the relationship. And on the green index card, I had the student and their parents write down what turns your son or daughter on to learning. What do they like? What do they expect? Because I framed it as this is going to be the best year ever. What do I need to do to be the best teacher you've ever had? And so they would write down all of these things, just bullet points. And then on the pink card, they wrote down things that turned them off to learning. And oh my gosh, just so much information that I gleaned from all of these sets of cards. So then I didn't get the information until the first day of school, because when the students came, they had their pink and green index cards, they had their media release forms, all the stuff. But that night, I just dedicated to learning about my students, and I had them, my periods were color coded. The green guinea pig class was period 1. Everybody had a name too, and they knew why they were a certain color. And then I learned about the students, but then if there was something like a parent might have emailed me on the QT that, hey, we're going through a hard time in our family, then I would say, is it appropriate to call you? When's a good time? And then I would call them to get more information. But the long story short, I couldn't have done my job without my parents. Could not have done it.
Thank you
at all.
so much, Barb. That is a beautiful story.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to the slide deck really quick and really appreciate you offering that, because I'm realizing that we're really running out of time here. So appreciate that. And also the points about modeling. This is a resource for you. I'll put it in the chat while Susan's talking, that can help you think about how to equip folks. And then I want Susan to,
I think we have a few more minutes because I want to just respond to some of the questions that just came up. And Keelan,
I think we have 3 minutes to the end, Susan.
I thought we'd go till 3.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. Sorry.
We actually, there's a lot of things, and Keelan wrote down what platforms you're reading. I was about to respond to you, and just to say there's multiple, ask families what works best for them. For some families, it's texting. For some families, it's email. For some families, it's that message or postcard home. So it's it depends on the community and what works best. And then everybody finds a rhythm, and some people have apps that they use, and then families join onto the app. So I think any number of those platforms can work, and just anything that works for communication, and not one thing works for everybody.
And Susan, I just wanted to offer up that the Parent Teacher Home Visiting Project, which I will put a link into, they have done a lot successfully using Zoom and using these kinds of virtual platforms as well. So sometimes for having that conversation, if families can't get there, that is an option, and they've found ways to do that.
And Barb, just so you know, Michelle added, I want to be in your class. You know, it's such an important thing. We all learn, and the expertise is in this room, so we all learn from each other, because there's little things that each of you are doing that we want to build on that repertoire. But one thing I wanted to say about the Caring Conversations is not everybody feels comfortable with one-to-one conversations, and not everybody feels comfortable with telephone conversations. I don't recall in my educational program in becoming a teacher that anyone actually told me how to have a conversation with a parent. They taught me how to have conversations with students, but not with parents. So sometimes we have to take time in staff meetings and offer that modeling and that chance for people to practice, or just offer to sit with somebody to say, would you like me to sit with you when you're having this conversation? Or do you want to just come to me afterwards? But offering that support. Hetty, did you want to go through this resource list?
Sure. So this is something that you can use if you're planning on trying to do some kind of professional development with staff, and you can also hand it out to staff. So the idea is that, especially as Susan said, not everyone's comfortable or had a chance to see this when they were getting trained for their position. So getting them to think about learn, and then they can actually write into this questions that they might ask families, and then and prep for it that way. And then you could even have people compare what they put here and support each other in figuring out what they would want to do. So I will say this is something that we shouldn't take people's comfort level or skill in doing these caring conversations for granted. We all, even when we're skillful, you sometimes run out of practice. And so giving folks a chance to practice and think about this and work with each other to practice and make it normal to ask each other for help and questions and advice about how to best engage families is really important.
All right. Love the comments that are coming up. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about showing up together. And this is our attendance awareness campaign slogan. And this message is so important in multiple levels. It's about the connections we make, and it's a reminder that it's all about us working together. It's not one person's responsibility. It definitely takes a village, and everybody plays a key role. Next slide. So you, I think, have in your comments have shown why it's so important to get the perspectives of students and families matter. I was so impressed with this group that you all talked about student voice and family voice at the very beginning. So I know you're all believers, you're here. But we have to remember and remind others that students have this untapped expertise and knowledge, and that we should really build on that. And that we also have to understand that we need to understand their specific realities. We have to address the challenges they experience. And we can't assume we know the challenges. I love assuming things, but I'm not necessarily right and I'm often wrong until I ask more questions. And I need to listen before I jump to solutions, because it's about that partnership. and what it means that we really do have to listen, because sometimes we're so quick to come up with that solution. We want to fix the problem because we're healers, we're educators, we're social workers, because we want to fix the problem. But we need to stop thinking of families and students as problems that we fix, but as partners in understanding the root cause and creating solutions. And they can create solutions for themselves and this whole school community. So that's what we're trying to think about here, and how we are inclusive of everybody. Next slide. So here's a number of tools that you can use when you're looking at that qualitative data. We looked at the quantitative data. Now we want to understand that we're hearing and taking in that qualitative data. We have a scan of environment and attendance tools that you can use, otherwise known as SEAT, that you can look for in the attendance works. Or you can talk about those empathy interviews, really targeting one-on-one conversations with a small group of students. The 2x10 is a great way. It's that 2 minutes for 2 minutes a day for 10 days to talking with a student. And sometimes as administrators, sometimes it's an administrator actually reaching out to another staff person that they don't have a connection with. Valuable tool to get to know somebody, not about the academics or their job, but on a personal level. Student focus groups are so important. And so you can learn. There's been so many examples of focus groups where schools have learned about the stressors affecting young people, and the difficult family situations they're going through. In another elementary school where we did parent focus groups, parents talked about the mixed messages they received from the school. Parents talked about that their student might have been sent home due to a behavior, but then if they kept the student home the next day, they were sent a letter to say, don't keep your student home. And that felt like a mixed message to them. And when the administrator heard this, she thought, I need to figure out, this is a real problem. This is real for these families. And together they worked out a better solution for the families. So we really need to hear from people. And there's always the attendance cafes where we're listening to more families. And the benefit of that is that a family may not, or a student may not feel comfortable talking about their own personal situation, but in a group, they can talk about their friend or what they've heard. And that may resemble their situation, but it doesn't have to feel so invasive to their own personal life. So it's a great way to get more information. Next slide. So how do you learn about why students miss school and what helps them show up to school? How do you do it? What are things that you found? I love, Barb, and you gave your suggestions of the note cards. That's a great way to do it. But what other ways have people used? I know there's lots of great ideas coming from this group.
Could it be us addressing the barrier, the conflict we had?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Carmen. That's what you're looking at. We can make assumptions about what that barrier is, but if we listen, we'll find out really what the root cause is. And sometimes you hear it right away, and sometimes it takes time, and that's okay.
Even sometimes being proactive and probing helps as well, because some families are just shut down. And if a family has been repeating themselves continuously to different organizations, it comes to a point and when their child's standing there, they're like, I don't even want to continue.
Absolutely. You have to building trust takes time. I mean, think about it. If somebody
being trustworthy. Yep. That's a big one.
Carmen, we actually have in one of we do this e-learning series, but we talk about the kind of cycle of family engagement, but it's also a cycle which it gets broken. Yeah. And we have to remember that there are these families, I'm just struck by what you talked about, who the problem is they've told people their challenges and no one did anything. And now you're entering into that mix. So it's not even anger directed necessarily at you. It is directed at you. You feel like it is, but not because you did something, but you're entering into this pre-existing experience, and us being sensitive to how that can happen for families. And then what is it that you need to make sure that your experience with families doesn't contribute to that? If that, how do you immediately get back to, how do you prove to them you're trustworthy, you're not just one more of those people?
Exactly. And there's certain school here where Children's Hospital, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. In that area, you have children that's coming from worldwide to getting health care. In the meantime, they're assigned to those schools in that catchment area. And what happens in that area, a lot of their attendance goes down because of the children, because they have to be admitted, get their services done, get their surgeries done. So that's another issue too that we have in our schools here in Philadelphia too. With that there, when the kids come in, and it's another barrier for them. So those families need like extra support, because it's like kind of hard for them to come, especially from another state, another city, or even another country, another side of the world, to come into Philadelphia and just be like, it becomes more overwhelming to them too. So I always said, if you are into family engagement, I look at it this way. I'm going to be the help. I'm going to be the crusader, but I could also be the dumpster where they can dump everything to me. But you don't take that into heart, because it's just helping them and hearing them out.
Absolutely. We all need to listen. And sometimes I love that you're a dumpster. You just got to listen sometimes.
Take it all.
Sometimes you take it in, which
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to solve every single problem that was mentioned.
And then I recycle it.
Yep. Yep. It just means that you can listen and acknowledge.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe there's something small.
Yes. A proactive listener is the best thing to be with our families. If you're not a proactive listener, then you're going to have some challenges too, but yes.
And Susan, there are some other things in the chat that are also really wonderful, like Dawn talking about teachers could simply ask students to fill in this question. I wish my teacher knew, which is a really simple and wonderful opening exercise, and how you would even build that to creating a culture at your school of inquiry and respect is really helpful.
I just want to add, and that's a question you can ask throughout the year, because as you gain more trust and increase your relationship, the student may answer that differently in January once they get to know you.
Well, and I think, Susan, this is part of, you had shared in those tools, the 2x10, which is you talk to a kid for 2 minutes every day for 10 days. And it's built on that assumption that the first time you talk with them, it might be kind of hard. They may not say it, but by day 10, now they really know you're there, and you might learn something different.
I love it. It's amazing what a cup of coffee can do. Absolutely. One of my favorite colleagues, who's a social worker, says she always visits a family with a cup of coffee. And she's found that that's opened doors and just made room for conversation. And it doesn't always work, but sometimes it's a second cup that makes a difference. So not to give up when it doesn't work the first time. It takes time to build trust. So next slide, please. So when we're talking, I love the suggestions you've made and the listening that you're talking about, that dumpster of hearing what's going on, really helps us understand how do we align the intervention for the reason of absence. And we have to be aware that sometimes what you're hearing is a symptom of what the root cause or the real problem is. And sometimes we have to listen very carefully. So, for example, is a student feeling anxious about being in school because they have no connections, or they feel so far behind in the class? And in one focus group, I had one student say to me, it was better to stay home than fail a test. So here are two students feeling anxious, but for two different reasons. One was afraid of failure, and one was afraid that they had no connections. So by understanding what's going on, I'm going to base my approach and I'm going to align my intervention differently based on the needs of the individual student. So if I'm the student who feels that there's no connection, well, then maybe I'll have them meet with the school counselor, or maybe I'll have lunch buddies, or maybe I'll have a leadership group that just is a small group of students that are talking together so we can build connections with the students. And for the student who's feeling anxious because they're afraid to, and feeling disengaged because they're afraid to fail school, well, maybe I need to create an individualized learning plan. Maybe I need to think about what that student needs for support because they're feeling like they're not learning or they can't learn. So that student needed a different kind of support. Or maybe it's the student that comes in late because they're taking care of their siblings and they're getting their siblings to school. And they show up late. You know, we can send lots of letters home, but that's not really addressing the problem. It's talking to the student and hearing from the student and maybe rearranging the student's schedule or supporting the student's family and figuring out another way to get the other siblings to school early. Sometimes there's transportation barriers. Any ideas that finding bus drivers is a national problem.
I was just thinking about that.
So we don't have a real, that tends to be a bigger problem. What are some what are some answers that some people have found? And I love the fact that you've just had these conversations, Angie, with your attendance team. Attendance isn't a problem, it's a symptom. Let's dig deeper. Any thoughts about that transportation barriers? This is such a creative group. I'm sure people can come up.
At one point, I did a summer tour for transportation and worked up there for transportation, the school district of Philadelphia. And it was so overwhelming how children are, even in the summer, like not being picked up on a fashionably timed manner or dropped off because there's so much chaoticness going on, shortness of transportation drivers. It's just a big problem. And I noticed that it's also being nationwide as well, too.
Yeah.
And it's very scary because that's something that in these modern times, transportation should be very accessible, easy, feasible for our children, but it's just
it's a real problem.
Susan, I was going to offer up two things. One is that I know that in Baltimore, folks actually organized it so that there was a space that kids could I think it was texting an office so that with the Baltimore the city municipal transportation. So when the buses weren't coming, when things weren't happening, there was a way for kids to inform the municipal transit system so that they could think about what those addresses are. And then Susan, there are some really great comments in the chat.
So, I noticed. Tammy, one school set up a carpool calling tree for students in the same neighborhood. Isn't that a great idea? I know another preschool program, they had a small program and they brought it up at one point at a family meetings with everybody. It was a family night. And they said, so if somebody's having trouble getting their child to school, any suggestions? And the parents actually came up with all sorts of suggestions on how they could help each other. So I love that neighborhood thinking together. And some people have used cab companies or passes for transportation. That's also great.
Susan, I've also heard of another place where they did kind of a diagnostic across the community. And what I mean by across the community, it was the charter schools, the after school, the public school system to figure out, because what they realized, and this is actually with the churches, for example, was that they could combine some of their solutions together. So they jointly hired a van that would do stuff for the churches during the weekend. They expanded learning and for charter schools at a different time. So sometimes if we can combine our understanding of what the challenges are, even across systems, you can come up with more scalable solutions. And then they also, like in this case, did some things where, they had arrangements, might even been with like Lyft or Hop Skip Drive in another approach where folks can then use kind of apps to fill in when something else breaks down.
I love that. And the cross systems. Thank you, Karen, for noticing that also. And couple of things. One, I was going to mention for a transportation barrier is also the walking school bus to the school bus stop or to the school. And although it might be categorized under transportation barrier, I know in a number of the walking school buses that I've been connected to, it also helped the student who had high anxiety, who felt disengaged, because all of a sudden there was a community of people walking the student to school. So it became more of a community event, and it's having 2 adult volunteers, helping walk to school. Now, another question that came up, and Melissa, what can schools do to help teachers with all this, with their plates overflowing? And one of the things that I want to point out here is that this is not just the teacher's responsibility. We have to think of this as, how can everyone be involved in this? How can we all support this and bringing in those community partners? And a lot of times when we think, especially for tier 2, who should make the call? Who should be involved? The best question that the attendance team can ask is, who has the best connection with this student? Is it or the family? And sometimes maybe it's the custodian or the janitor. Maybe it's an ed tech. Maybe it's somebody else. So it doesn't always fall on the teacher's shoulders. And bite off just a little bit. You don't have to do everything at once. Just pick one thing that you're working on at a time, and slowly you build up your foundation. So next slide. Thank you for all your ideas. Here's an attendance pyramid worksheet. This is another helpful tool. It's organizing your multi-tiered attendance strategy. And this is looking at it at the tiered levels, but also looking at it by sort of topic areas, because we found that this topic areas are really the headers for a lot of things that happen in schools. So you can look at it versus family engagement, positive student engagement, behavioral mental health, physical health, academic support, extended learning, and basic needs. And you can actually just fill in what happens in your school. And you might notice that you have a lot going on for academic support and not much going and positive student engagement, but not much going on for family engagement. So you can notice that you can fill in the gaps and see maybe there's something more that we can do. So there's all sorts of, it's just a tool to sort of support you in your work. Next slide. So we want to hear from you. We have a little bit of time left. What's a strategy or resource you've heard about today that you're excited to try? What's something that you want to strengthen or you want to, that's new? Feel free to type in the chat. Walking buddies for the walking, the districts. And that's a walking school bus to school or to the school bus stop. Forming an attendance team. I'm glad, Melissa. It sounds like you just got a resource for help. Attendance teams, riding buddies. Thanks. Building in those awareness, home visits, training teachers. And you can have targeted teacher visits. Oh, look at all these things. I am inspired by all of you. I love attendance celebrations. And really to think about good and improved. That's what's really important. Other ideas? Home visits? Oh, just inspired by all the work that's going to be happening. Excited to hear about it. So we want to, you can get, one thing I forgot to mention with the attendance pyramid worksheet, In here is also a list of the sample activities that you can use, but we also will have in the appendix access to a blank one that you can add in for your district. So that's a resource you can use. In our final minutes together, I just want to share that we will get an appendix. We have questions. You'll also see that there's our emails are also being included in here. So if you have additional questions, we're available to respond to that. And then there'll be an appendix of some resources available for you. So if we take down the slides for a minute and just let you open up, you can ask your questions in chat, or you can unmute and ask your question, or just something that strikes you, something you want to add.
And I want to remind everyone that everything we've put on here essentially exists somewhere on our website. So if you go to www.attendanceworks.org, you can find it. There's a little search function too in the corner that you can say attendance success plan. So if you couldn't figure out how to navigate it, that's another approach to looking for information. It is meant to be a giveaway strategy. We aren't trying to be everywhere. We want everyone to do the good work, and we want them to not have to, reinvent the wheel, but actually build off lessons learned and resources that we've been gathering from our work across the country in partnership with so many people like you. So please go to our website to look for materials.
Thank you, Hattie and Susan, for sharing your time and knowledge. So does anyone else have questions?
Or comments? If you want to finish with the recording, we are happy to stay on for a few more minutes and answer any questions. But we want to also honor and thank you for all the work that you do every day. Obviously, you are so committed to this work. You're here. You're taking time out of your busy day to be here. So thank you so much for everything you do.
And thank you all for spending your day at the Ohio Family Engagement Leadership Summit. And while we hope you can take some knowledge from today and apply it to your work tomorrow, the learning doesn't stop here. And be sure to be on the lookout for emails from the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center for follow-up opportunities to this summit.